Sarah Mitchell gripped the steering wheel with icy fingers. Despite the heater being turned up, the cold seeped through every crack of her old car. Outside, it was the depths of winter, and the streets were deserted under a thick blanket of snow. The thermometer on the dashboard flashed alarmingly low temperatures. Her thoughts were consumed by the warmth of her home when her gaze caught on something, a dark figure among the trees. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She slammed on the brakes, and the tires skidded briefly on the icy asphalt. Her breath fogged up the windshield as she directed the headlights toward the figure. It wasn't a shadow or a tree stump. It was a dog, a German shepherd, lying motionless in the snow tied to a tree. Horror washed over her. Without hesitation, she flung the car door open and stumbled out. The icy wind bit her cheeks, but she didn't care. Snow crunched under her boots as she rushed through the thick flurry toward the animal. The dog barely moved. Its fur was covered in frost, its ribs visible beneath its thin skin. The rope around its neck was so tightly frozen, it looked like a noose. Sarah's chest tightened. Who could do such a thing? "Hey, buddy," she said softly, but the dog didn't stir. She knelt down and gently pressed a hand against its side. A faint rise and fall. It was still alive. Panicked, she tugged at the rope, but it was frozen solid. Her fingers burned with cold as she tried to untie the knot, but it was no use. Desperately, she looked around for a tool, then her eyes fell on her car keys. Without a second thought, she pulled them from her pocket and stabbed the metal into the frozen knot, scratching, twisting, and prying. The ice slowly splintered. The dog whimpered softly, a sign of life. "Hold on, I'll get you out," she panted, her knuckles aching from the effort. Then with a sudden crack, the knot gave way and the rope fell loose. But the dog collapsed immediately. Sarah's heart raced. She tore off her coat and wrapped it around the shivering body. Its fur felt like ice, its breathing barely perceptible. She knew it wouldn't survive if she didn't act fast. With all her strength, she lifted the dog. It was far too light for its size, and carried it to the car. Its head hung limply against her shoulder as she stumbled back. She yanked the door open and carefully laid the dog on the passenger seat. "Stay with me, buddy," she whispered, turning the heater to full blast. But the dog remained still. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she started the car and sped off. The tires skidded on the icy road, but she didn't care. The nearest animal clinic was 20 minutes away. She didn't have 20 minutes. She glanced at the dog. Its eyes were half open but unseeing. Its body was still freezing. Her fingers found its neck. Its pulse was barely there. Panic surged through her. Then an idea struck her. She ripped off her gloves and pressed her bare hands against its ribs. The cold burned her skin, but she didn't pull away. "Please hold on," she whispered. The seconds stretched into eternity. Then a faint, broken whimper, barely audible, but it was there. Hope flickered within her. She pressed the accelerator harder. The lights of the city slowly came into view, but every second felt endless. The dog was still ice cold, its breathing irregular. Sarah's mind raced. What if it was too late? She reached the clinic, flung the door open, and lifted the dog into her arms. "I need help," she cried, her voice trembling. A woman in scrubs rushed out. "Bring him in now!" Sarah stumbled into the warmth. Finally, a spark of hope. Inside, there was frantic activity. Veterinarians and assistants hurried over, taking the dog from her and gently placing it on a stretcher. "How long was he outside?" one of the assistants asked as they draped a warming blanket over the lifeless body. "I don't know. Too long," Sarah gasped. Dr. Carter, an older veterinarian with a determined expression, stepped forward. "We need to warm him up, start IVs, and stabilize him." Sarah could only nod, unable to speak. She watched as the dog was wheeled into the treatment room. There was nothing more she could do but wait. The waiting was unbearable. Every second dragged on endlessly. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the door opened. Dr. Carter stepped out and looked at Sarah gravely. "He's very weak, but he's alive." Sarah's knees buckled, and she leaned against the wall for support. A shiver ran through her, this time not from the cold, but from relief. "Can I see him?" she asked softly. Dr. Carter nodded. "But only briefly. He needs rest." Sarah entered the room and saw the dog wrapped in blankets, an IV in its paw. Its breathing was weak, but it was there. She stepped closer, reached out a hand, and gently touched its fur. "You're not alone," she whispered. For the first time, its tail twitched slightly, a tiny sign, but it meant everything. Sarah sat in one of the uncomfortable chairs in the clinic's waiting room, her hands tightly clasped in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. The sterile air was filled with the quiet sounds of the staff and the beeping of medical equipment. But for Sarah, only one question mattered. Would the dog make it? Her gaze kept drifting to the treatment room door. Behind it, the animal was fighting for its life, and she could do nothing. She hated this helplessness. The moment she had found the dog in the snow kept replaying in her mind. The cold, the fear, the desperation. She hadn't saved him just to lose him now. Dr. Carter finally appeared in the doorway, her expression neutral, but her eyes betraying exhaustion. Sarah jumped to her feet. "How is he?" she asked breathlessly. The vet sighed. "He's extremely weak, but he's slowly stabilizing. The hypothermia has put a lot of strain on his system, and he's severely malnourished. But we're doing our best." Sarah's hands relaxed slightly. "Can I see him?" Dr. Carter hesitated, then nodded. "But only for a moment. He needs a lot of rest." Sarah followed her into the treatment room. The German Shepherd lay motionless on a padded table, wrapped in blankets, an IV providing fluids. His breathing was barely audible, but as Sarah approached, he slowly opened his eyes. A shiver ran through her. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, her hand gently stroking his rough, matted fur. "You're not alone anymore." His ears twitched weakly, a tiny flicker of life in his eyes. Sarah felt tears welling up, but she blinked them away. Dr. Carter watched the scene silently, then cleared her throat. "We've checked for a microchip." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "And he has one." Dr. Carter held up a small scanner. "The owner is registered in this city." A cold shudder ran through Sarah's body. Someone in this city had abandoned him. The vet nodded gravely. "We have to contact the owner." Sarah's stomach churned. "And if they don't want him back?" Dr. Carter looked at her intently. "Then he can be adopted." Sarah suddenly felt sure. "I want him." A smile flickered across Dr. Carter's lips. "Let's wait and see what the owner says. But I think fate has already brought him to you." Sarah's gaze returned to the dog. She knew she couldn't let him be abandoned again. If there was a way to give him a new home, she would take it. Hours passed. Sarah couldn't bring herself to leave the clinic. She sat in the small waiting area, her thoughts racing. What if the dog had permanent damage? What if he never fully recovered? The door to the treatment room opened again, and a nurse stepped out. "Would you like to give him a name?" Sarah blinked, surprised. A name. A strange warmth spread through her. "Yes," she said slowly. "Rex," the nurse smiled. "A strong name for a strong fighter." Sarah's chest tightened as she looked at Rex's sleeping form. "Yes," she murmured. "He deserves a second chance." Later that evening, she sat down with Dr. Carter. "We've contacted the owner," the vet said. "He has no interest in taking him back." Sarah felt a mix of relief and anger. "Then he's mine now." Dr. Carter nodded slowly. "Yes, if that's what you really want." Sarah took a deep breath. "I do." And with those words, a new chapter began for her and Rex. Sarah watched Rex, who lay curled up on a blanket in her living room. His breathing was steady, but his body was still weak. Since bringing him home from the clinic, she had been tirelessly working to make him feel safe. Yet despite everything, a deep uncertainty lingered within her. Had she made the right decision? She had never planned to adopt a dog, but now Rex was here. His fur was still dull, his ribs visible, but his eyes were alert, and when she gently stroked his head, his tail wagged weakly. It was enough to warm her heart. Life with Rex became routine. In the mornings, they went for walks. During the day, he accompanied her to her small studio where she worked. In the evenings, they lounged on the couch together. Sarah knew her life had become richer because of him, but one day she received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Carter. "Sarah, I just wanted to let you know that the authorities have held Rex's previous owner accountable. He's being charged with animal cruelty." Sarah took a deep breath, a wave of relief washing over her. "That's good news. No one should be able to do that to an animal." I thought you'd want to know. Rex is officially your dog now. No one can take him from you. Sarah looked over at Rex, who was watching her intently. He's been my dog from the start. Now it's just official. In the days that followed, Sarah felt freer than ever. She knew she and Rex had been given a second chance. Together. They went on longer outings, played in the park, and explored new places. Rex learned to trust again, and Sarah realized how much she needed him. A particularly moving moment came when she stood with him in a field for the first time without a leash. She held her breath as she removed his collar, unsure if he would stay or run. But Rex stayed. He looked at her, wagged his tail, and lay down in the grass. In that moment, Sarah knew he trusted her completely. Over time, a deep friendship blossomed between them. Sarah began taking Rex on hikes, short trails at first, but soon they were trekking through hills and forests together. She often talked to him, telling him about her day, and sometimes it seemed like he understood exactly what she was saying. He became not just her companion, but also her confidant. On a cold autumn evening, they sat together on her porch. Sarah held a steaming cup of tea, while Rex lay curled at her feet. She watched the leaves dance in the wind and let her thoughts wander. She never would have thought that one night could change her life so profoundly. But here she was, with a dog who had once been near death and was now her loyal friend. One night, Sarah woke to the sound of Rex growling deeply. She sat up and listened. Footsteps were approaching the front door. Her heart raced, but she didn't feel alone. Rex was there. As the footsteps hesitated, he slowly relaxed but remained alert. Sarah knew she had found not just a friend in him, but also a protector. The days grew shorter, and the first snow fell. Sarah remembered the night she had found Rex. She could hardly believe how far they had both come. On a particularly cold evening, she sat by the fireplace. Rex curled up beside her. She gently stroked his fur and smiled. "We made it, didn't we?" Rex lifted his head, looked at her with his loyal eyes, and gently licked her hand. In that moment, she knew this wasn't an ending, but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter filled with trust, friendship, and unconditional love. Whatever the future held, they would face it together.